The thunder rolled across the Montana plains like the voice of an angry god, and Rancher pulled his worn coat tighter as he made his final rounds of the evening. At 43, he'd weathered more storms than he cared to count, but something about this one felt different, heavier, more ominous. The wind carried whispers of change, and in his experience, change rarely brought good news to men like him. "Hi, how are you? I'm interrupting quickly just to ask you to click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help a lot. Thank you, and I hope you like the story." His ranch sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, a town that tolerated his presence more than welcomed it. For 15 years, he'd lived this solitary existence, trading his labor for supplies and keeping his past buried deeper than any grave. The townsfolk knew him as a man of few words and fewer friends, reliable in his work, but distant in his manner. They didn't know about the family he'd lost, the guilt that gnawed at him like a persistent wound, or the reason he'd chosen this exile from human connection. As lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark white flashes, Rancher spotted something that made him freeze mid-step. There, huddled against his barn door like a broken doll, was a small figure. His heart hammered as he approached, the rain pelting his face and obscuring his vision. When another lightning strike revealed the truth, his breath caught in his throat. It was a child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her dress was torn and muddy, her dark hair plastered to her skull by the rain. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, wide, terrified, and utterly silent. She clutched something in her small fist, her knuckles white with the effort of holding on to whatever secret she carried. "Jesus," Rancher whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. "What happened to you, little one?" The girl didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear him. She stared straight ahead with the hollow gaze of someone who'd seen too much, experienced horrors that no child should ever witness. When Rancher reached out slowly, she flinched, but didn't run. Her clothes were soaked through and he could feel her trembling. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. Without hesitation, Rancher scooped her up in his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, all sharp angles and fragile bones. As he carried her toward his modest cabin, he felt something shift inside him. A protective instinct he thought had died with his own daughter years ago. Inside, he wrapped her in blankets and built up the fire until the room glowed with warmth. The girl sat exactly where he placed her, unmoving, unseeing. Her small fist remained clenched around whatever she held, and Rancher didn't try to pry it open. Trust, he knew, was something that had to be earned, especially from someone who'd been hurt. "You hungry?" he asked softly, moving to his simple kitchen. She didn't respond, but he prepared a bowl of warm soup anyway, setting it within her reach. "I'm not going to hurt you," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever happened, whatever you're running from, you're safe here." As the storm raged outside, Rancher found himself studying the child's face in the firelight. There was something familiar about her features, something that tugged at the edges of his memory. But more than that, there was a quality to her silence that spoke of trauma so deep it had stolen her voice entirely. The next morning brought Sheriff Tom Bradley to his door. Tom had been the closest thing to a friend Rancher had in Millbrook, one of the few people who didn't treat him like a pariah. But the expression on Tom's weathered face suggested this wasn't a social call. "Morning, Rancher," Tom said, tipping his hat. His eyes immediately found the girl, who sat at the kitchen table exactly where Rancher had left her, still wrapped in blankets, still silent. Heard you might have found something that belongs to the town. She's not a thing, Rancher replied, his voice carrying a warning edge. She's a child who needed help. Tom's jaw tightened. That child is connected to what happened at the Hartwell place 3 nights ago. The family was murdered, Rancher. All of them except... He gestured toward the girl. Except her. The words hit Rancher like a physical blow. The Hartwells, he knew them by reputation, a wealthy family who owned the largest ranch in the county. Marcus Hartwell had been a pillar of the community, his wife Sarah known for her charity work. They had children, he remembered now, including a daughter about this girl's age. "You're saying this is Emma Hartwell?" Rancher asked, looking at the child with new understanding. "That's what we think. But here's the thing. She was found at the scene, covered in blood. The whole family was butchered, and she was the only one left alive. People are asking questions, Rancher. Hard questions about how a little girl could survive when everyone else died." Rancher felt his protective instincts flare. "You think she had something to do with it? She's 8 years old, Tom." "I'm not saying anything," Tom replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just telling you what people are thinking. And right now, they're thinking you need to bring her into town so we can sort this out proper-like." "No." The word came out flat and final. Rancher moved closer to the girl, positioning himself between her and the sheriff. "She's traumatized. She hasn't spoken a word since I found her. Whatever she saw, whatever happened to her family, she needs time to heal, not to be paraded around town like some kind of curiosity." Tom's expression hardened. "This isn't a request, Rancher. The town council met this morning. They want her brought in for questioning. The town council can go to hell." The sheriff's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, then stopped. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know I respect you, but I've got a job to do. And I've got a conscience to live with," Rancher shot back. "That little girl stays here until she's ready to face the world again. End of discussion." Tom studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're making a mistake. People are scared, and scared people do stupid things. You keep her here, you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of this town's judgment." Wouldn't be the first time. After Tom left, Rancher sat across from Emma, if that was indeed her name, and really looked at her for the first time. In the daylight, he could see bruises on her arms, scratches on her face that spoke of a desperate flight through rough terrain. But it was her eyes that haunted him most. They held the kind of emptiness that came from witnessing unspeakable evil. "I don't know what you saw," he said quietly, "but I promise you this. Nobody's going to hurt you while you're under my roof. I don't care what the whole damn town thinks." For just a moment, her eyes flickered toward him, and he thought he saw something there. A spark of recognition, perhaps even gratitude. Then she looked away again, retreating back into her protective silence. As the day wore on, Rancher found himself remembering his own daughter, Lucy, who would have been about Emma's age if she'd lived. Lucy had been full of laughter and mischief, everything this broken child was not. But there were similarities, too. The stubborn set of her jaw, the way she held herself with a dignity that seemed too old for her years. That evening, as he prepared dinner, Rancher noticed Emma watching him with curious eyes. He moved slowly, deliberately, making sure she could see everything he was doing. Trust, he reminded himself, had to be built one small gesture at a time. "You know," he said conversationally, as if she might actually respond, "I had a daughter once. She was about your age when..." He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Even after all these years, talking about Lucy felt like reopening a wound that had never properly healed. Emma's head tilted slightly, the first real reaction he'd seen from her. "She died in a fire," he continued, his voice barely audible. "Along with her mother. I wasn't there to save them. Been carrying that guilt ever since." He set a plate of food in front of her, and this time she actually looked at it. Progress, he thought. Small steps. "Maybe that's why you ended up here," he mused. "Maybe this is my chance to do right by a child who needs protecting." As night fell, Rancher made up a bed for Emma in his small spare room. She followed his movements with those haunted eyes, but said nothing. When he tucked the blankets around her, she finally opened her clenched fist, revealing what she'd been holding all this time. It was a small silver locket, tarnished and dented. Rancher's breath caught as he recognized it. He'd seen Sarah Hartwell wearing it at church services. Inside, he knew, would be pictures of her family. The fact that Emma had held on to it through whatever nightmare she'd endured spoke volumes about her strength and her love for her lost family. "You keep that safe," he whispered, gently closing her fingers around the locket again. "It's all you have left of them." For the first time since he'd found her, Emma's eyes filled with tears. They didn't fall, but they were there. Proof that somewhere beneath the trauma and silence, the little girl she'd been was still fighting to survive. That night, as Rancher sat by his window watching the road, he knew his life had changed irrevocably. The town would come for Emma eventually, and when they did, he'd have to make a choice between his own safety and protecting an innocent child. But as he thought about Lucy, about the family he'd failed to save, he realized the choice had already been made. Whatever secrets Emma carried, whatever truth lay buried in the ashes of the Hartwell tragedy, he would stand between her and the world until she was strong enough to face it herself, even if it cost him everything. The storm had passed, but Rancher could feel another one building on the horizon, one that would test not just his resolve, but the very soul of Millbrook itself. 3 days after Sheriff Bradley's visit, the first stone shattered Rancher's kitchen window. Emma, who had just begun to eat small portions of the meals he prepared, immediately retreated to the corner where she'd spent most of her time, her small body trembling with renewed fear. Rancher swept up the glass with steady hands, but inside, his anger burned like a forge fire. The note wrapped around the stone was brief and unsigned. "Give us the girl or face the consequences." "Cowards," Rancher muttered, crumpling the paper. He looked at Emma, whose wide eyes tracked his every movement. "Don't you worry, little one. Takes more than broken glass to scare off an old cowhand like me." But the stone was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated with methodical cruelty. His fence posts were cut, allowing his cattle to wander onto the main road. Someone poisoned his well, forcing him to haul water from the creek a mile away. His supply deliveries from town suddenly stopped without explanation, leaving him to stretch their dwindling food stores. The isolation might have broken a lesser man, but Rancher had lived with loneliness for so long it felt like an old coat, uncomfortable but familiar. What troubled him more was watching Emma retreat further into herself with each act of hostility. She'd begun to respond to his presence, even managed a few tentative bites of the meals he prepared, but now she sat motionless for hours, clutching her mother's locket like a talisman against the growing darkness. On Sunday morning, Rancher made a decision that surprised even himself. He hitched up his wagon, helped Emma into the passenger seat, and drove into town for church services. The girl hadn't spoken a word about wanting to go, but something in her eyes when she heard the distant church bells suggested a longing for the familiar rhythms of the life she'd lost. The reaction when they arrived at Millbrook's only church was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men's hands moved instinctively toward their weapons. Rancher had expected hostility, but the raw fear and disgust on their faces caught him off guard. "That's him," someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. "That's the man harboring the devil child." Rancher helped Emma down from the wagon, noting how she pressed close to his side as they walked toward the church steps. Reverend Morrison, a thin man with prematurely gray hair and nervous eyes, blocked their path. "I'm sorry, Rancher," the Reverend said, his voice carrying across the churchyard. "But I can't allow that child inside God's house. Not after what she's done." "What she's done?" Rancher's voice was dangerously quiet. "She's 8 years old, Reverend. What exactly do you think she's capable of?" "The whole family was butchered," Morrison replied, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "Everyone, except her. She was found covered in their blood, not a scratch on her. You tell me how that's possible unless she had help from darker forces." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Rancher looked around at faces he'd known for 15 years, people he'd helped during harsh winters, whose cattle he'd rounded up when they strayed, whose fences he'd mended without being asked. Now they looked at him like he was harboring a plague carrier. "You're talking about a traumatized child," Rancher said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "A little girl who watched her family die and somehow survived. Instead of showing Christian compassion, you're treating her like she's cursed." "Maybe she is," called out Martha Henley, the town's self-appointed moral authority. "Maybe the devil protected her for his own purposes. Why else would she be the only one left alive?" Emma's small hand found Rancher's, her fingers ice cold despite the warm morning. He looked down at her pale face and saw not evil or supernatural influence, but a child drowning in grief and terror, desperately seeking an anchor in a world that had turned hostile. "Come on, little one," he said softly, turning away from the church. "We'll find our own way to pray." But their path was blocked by a group of men led by Marcus Webb, the town's wealthiest merchant, and a man who'd never liked Rancher's independent streak. Webb's face was flushed with anger and something that looked suspiciously like fear. "You're not taking her anywhere," Webb declared. "The town council met again last night. We've decided that child needs to be turned over to the territorial authorities for proper investigation. The town council has no authority over me or anyone else on my land," Rancher replied evenly. "Your land?" Webb laughed harshly. "You think that patch of dirt makes you untouchable? You're harboring a murderer, Rancher. That makes you an accessory to the crime." "She's a child. She's an abomination," Webb shot back. "And if you won't do the right thing, we'll do it for you." The crowd pressed closer, and Rancher could smell their fear sweat, could see the mob mentality taking hold in their eyes. These weren't evil people, he realized. They were terrified people looking for someone to blame, someone to punish for the horror that had shattered their sense of safety. "You want to take her?" Rancher asked quietly, his hand moving to rest on the grip of his Colt. "You're welcome to try." The standoff stretched taut as a wire, 40-odd people facing down one man and a silent child. Then Sheriff Bradley pushed through the crowd, his face grim but determined. "That's enough," Tom said firmly. "Everyone back away, now." "Tom, you can't let him," Webb began. "I said back away." The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. "This is still a town governed by law, not mob rule. Reluctantly, the crowd gave ground, but their hostility remained palpable. Tom approached Rancher with careful steps, his hands visible and empty. "You need to take her home," Tom said quietly. "This is getting out of hand." "I never wanted trouble," Rancher replied. "I just wanted to help a child who needed it." "I know, but people are scared, and scared people don't think straight. Take her home and we'll figure out a better way to handle this." As they walked back to the wagon, Rancher heard the whispers following them like a malevolent wind. "Devil child," he cursed. "Should have died with the rest of them." Each word seemed to make Emma shrink further into herself, and by the time they reached home, she'd retreated completely into her protective silence. That afternoon, Dr. Samuel Hayes arrived at the ranch unannounced. Hayes was one of the few educated men in Millbrook, a former Army surgeon who'd settled in the territory after the war. He was also one of the few people who'd ever treated Rancher with genuine respect. "Heard you've been having some trouble," Hayes said, dismounting from his horse with the careful movements of a man whose joints had seen too many hard years. "Nothing I can't handle," Rancher replied, but he was glad to see a friendly face. "Mind if I take a look at the girl? Professional opinion might help calm some of the hysteria in town." Rancher considered this, then nodded. "She doesn't talk. Hasn't said a word since I found her." Hayes found Emma sitting in her usual corner, staring out the window at nothing. He approached slowly, speaking in the gentle tone doctors used with frightened patients. "Hello, Emma," he said softly. "I'm Dr. Hayes. I'd like to make sure you're not hurt." The examination was brief and respectful. Hayes checked her pulse, looked into her eyes, examined the fading bruises on her arms. Throughout it all, Emma remained perfectly still, neither resisting nor cooperating. When he finished, Hayes pulled Rancher aside. "Physically, she's malnourished and shows signs of exhaustion, but nothing that won't heal with time and care. Mentally," he shook his head. "I've seen this before, during the war. Soldiers who witnessed such horror that their minds simply shut down to protect them. It's called traumatic mutism. Will she recover? Maybe, with patience, kindness, and time. But forcing her to relive whatever she experienced could do permanent damage." Hayes paused, studying Rancher's face. "The town's saying she's possessed, that she had something to do with her family's death. What do you think?" "I think she's a little girl who survived something unspeakable and is being blamed for it because people need someone to blame. The real question is, what are you prepared to sacrifice to protect her?" That evening, as if summoned by Hayes's words, the answer came in the form of torches moving across the prairie toward his ranch. Rancher counted at least 20 men on horseback, their faces hidden by shadows and bandanas. At their head rode Marcus Webb, his expensive suit replaced by range clothes that made him look like what he truly was, a man playing at being a frontier vigilante. Rancher checked his rifle, made sure his pistol was loaded, then turned to Emma. "I need you to hide," he said gently. "There's a root cellar behind the kitchen. Can you find it?" For the first time since he'd found her, Emma nodded. She understood danger even if she couldn't voice her fear. "Good girl. Stay there no matter what you hear. Don't come out until I come for you." The riders stopped just outside his property line, close enough to be threatening but far enough away to claim they weren't trespassing. Webb rode forward alone, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Last chance, Rancher," he called out. "Send out the girl, and we'll let you walk away from this." "And if I don't," Rancher replied, stepping onto his porch with the rifle cradled in his arms, "then we'll come take her, and you won't like how we do it." Rancher studied the faces he could see in the torchlight. Some were strangers, drifters, and troublemakers Webb had probably paid to swell his numbers. But others were men he'd known for years, neighbors who'd shared meals at his table, fellow ranchers who'd worked alongside him during cattle drives. "You really think that little girl killed her family?" he asked, his voice carrying to the entire group. "Don't matter what we think," Webb replied. "Matters what we know. And we know she's the only one who survived. We know she was covered in blood. And we know that ever since you took her in, strange things have been happening in this town." "What strange things?" "Cattle dying for no reason. Wells going dry. Children having nightmares about a girl with dead eyes." Webb's voice rose with each accusation. "She's cursed, Rancher, and you're bringing that curse down on all of us." Rancher almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Cattle died from disease and predators. Wells went dry during droughts. Children had nightmares because adults filled their heads with ghost stories and superstitions. But he could see that logic wouldn't reach these men. They'd moved beyond reason into the realm of pure fear. "I'm not giving her up," he said simply. "Then you've made your choice." The attack, when it came, was swift and coordinated. Half the riders circled around to approach from the back, while the others charged straight at the house. Rancher's first shot took down the lead horse, sending its rider tumbling into the dirt. His second shattered a torch, plunging part of the group into darkness. But there were too many of them, and they'd come prepared for resistance. Flaming arrows began hitting his roof, and within minutes, smoke was pouring from the eaves. Rancher found himself caught between fighting the fire and fighting the men trying to break down his door. In the chaos, he didn't see the rider who'd circled around to the kitchen window until it was too late. The man was inside, heading for the root cellar where Emma was hidden. Rancher abandoned his position at the front door and raced through the smoke-filled house, arriving just as the intruder lifted the cellar door. The fight was brief and brutal. The intruder was younger and stronger, but Rancher fought with the desperate fury of a man protecting something precious. When it was over, the stranger lay unconscious on the kitchen floor, and Rancher's knuckles were bloody. "Emma!" he called down into the cellar. "It's me. You can come up now." But when she emerged, her eyes held a new kind of terror. She'd heard the violence above, had probably expected to die in that dark hole beneath the earth. The trust he'd worked so hard to build was cracking under the weight of the town's hatred. The fire was spreading faster now, and Rancher knew the house was lost. He grabbed what supplies he could carry, helped Emma into the wagon, and drove away from the only home he'd known for 15 years. Behind them, his life burned against the night sky while the mob cheered their victory. As they fled into the darkness, Emma finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse, but the words were clear enough to stop Rancher's heart. "They killed them," she said. "The men in masks. They killed my family, and now they want to kill me too." The truth hit Rancher like a physical blow. Emma hadn't just witnessed her family's murder, she'd seen the faces of the killers. And those killers were among the very people hunting her now, using the town's superstition and fear to cover their tracks. "Who?" he asked urgently. "Who did you see?" But Emma had retreated back into silence, the brief moment of trust shattered by the night's violence. Rancher drove on through the darkness, his mind racing with the implications of what she'd revealed. Somewhere in Millbrook, murderers walked free while their victim was branded a devil child, and he was the only thing standing between Emma and the people who wanted her dead. Not because they feared her supernatural influence, but because they feared what she might remember. The game had changed completely. This wasn't about superstition anymore. This was about murder. The abandoned mining camp sat like a skeleton against the Montana sky, its weathered buildings and rusted equipment testament to dreams that had died with the played-out silver veins. Rancher had remembered the place from his early days in the territory, when desperate men still believed they could coax fortune from the unforgiving earth. Now it would serve as sanctuary for a man and child the world had branded as outcasts. Emma hadn't spoken again since her whispered revelation 3 nights ago, but something had changed in her demeanor. She no longer sat motionless for hours. Instead, she watched everything with the alertness of a hunted animal. When Rancher moved around their makeshift camp, her eyes tracked him constantly, as if she expected danger to materialize from the shadows at any moment. "We can't stay here forever," Rancher said quietly as he prepared their meager breakfast over a small fire. The smoke was barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, but he still worried about being spotted. "Those men won't give up looking for us." Emma's hand moved unconsciously to the locket at her throat, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Rancher had noticed she touched it whenever she was thinking about her family, as if the small piece of silver could somehow connect her to the people she'd lost. "I know you're scared," he continued, settling beside her on the fallen log that served as their bench. "I know you don't want to remember what happened that night. But those men who killed your family, they're still out there. And as long as people think you're some kind of devil child, they're going to keep getting away with murder." For a moment, Emma's eyes met his, and he saw a flicker of the intelligent, brave little girl she'd been before tragedy stole her voice. Then she looked away, but not before he caught something else in her expression, a decision being made. That afternoon, as Rancher worked to make their shelter more secure, Emma did something that surprised him. She picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt near the fire pit. At first, he thought she was just keeping herself occupied, but as he watched, he realized she was creating a deliberate pattern, a crude map of some kind. "What's that, little one?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Emma's stick moved with increasing urgency, sketching out what looked like buildings, roads, and landmarks. She pointed to one structure, then to herself, then made a slashing motion across her throat. The meaning was clear. This was where her family had died. "The Hartwell Ranch," Rancher murmured, studying her drawing. "You're showing me the ranch." Emma nodded, then pointed to several spots around the main house and held up fingers. First 3, then 4, then 2. She was indicating the positions of the attackers, Rancher realized. She'd seen exactly how many men there were and where they'd positioned themselves. 9 men total, he said, and Emma nodded again. "You saw all their faces?" This time her response was more complicated. She pointed to some of the positions and nodded, then to others, and shook her head. Some of the killers had worn masks or bandanas, but others had been careless enough to show their faces to what they assumed would be a dead witness. Over the next hour, Emma's drawings became more detailed and specific. She sketched out the sequence of events, how the men had surrounded the house, how they'd forced their way inside, how her father had tried to fight them off while her mother hid Emma in a storage closet. The crude stick figures couldn't convey the full horror of what she'd witnessed, but they told the story clearly enough to make Rancher's blood run cold. "Your mother hid you," he said softly. "That's how you survived." Emma's drawing showed a small figure crouched in a tiny space while violence raged outside. She'd been forced to listen to her family's screams, to their pleas for mercy that went unanswered. When the killers finally left, she'd emerged to find a scene of carnage that would have broken most adults, let alone a child. But it was her final drawing that made Rancher's heart race. Emma sketched a figure standing over her father's body, a man without a mask, his face clearly visible. Then she drew something that made Rancher's blood freeze, a distinctive scar running from the man's left ear to the corner of his mouth. Rancher knew that scar. He'd seen it every Sunday for the past 5 years, sitting in the front pew of Millbrook's church. "Marcus Webb," he whispered. Emma's violent nod confirmed his worst suspicions. The town's most respected citizen, the man who'd led the mob to burn down Rancher's home, was also the man who'd orchestrated the Hartwell family's murder. But why? Rancher asked, more to himself than to Emma. Why would Webb want your family dead? Emma's next drawing provided the answer. She sketched what looked like papers scattered around her father's study, then drew a man, Webb again, searching frantically through the documents. Whatever Marcus Hartwell had discovered, it was worth killing for. As the pieces fell into place, Rancher felt a cold fury building in his chest. Webb had murdered an entire family to cover up some secret, then used the town's superstition and fear to hunt down the only witness. The man who'd stood in church that morning, calling Emma an abomination, had been the very devil he claimed to oppose. "We need proof," Rancher said grimly. "Your word against his won't be enough, especially with the whole town thinking you're cursed. We need evidence that even the most stubborn fool can't ignore." Emma pointed to her drawing of the scattered papers, then to herself. She'd seen what Webb was looking for, had watched him search through her father's private documents. If those papers still existed, they might hold the key to exposing the truth. The ranch, Rancher mused. We'd have to go back to the ranch. The idea was insane. The Hartwell property was undoubtedly being watched, either by Webb's men or by curious townspeople drawn to the scene of the notorious murders. Going back would be walking into a trap. But as Rancher looked at Emma's determined face, he realized they didn't have a choice. She'd carried this terrible secret for weeks, had endured being branded a monster while her family's real killers walked free. She deserved justice, and more importantly, she deserved the chance to clear her name and reclaim her life. "All right," he said finally. "We'll go back, but we do this smart and careful. One mistake, and we'll both end up dead." They spent the rest of the day planning. The ranch was a half-day's ride from their hiding place, which meant they'd have to travel at night to avoid being seen. Emma drew more detailed maps showing the layout of the house, the location of her father's study, and the best approaches that would keep them hidden from any watchers. As night fell, they set out on horseback, Emma riding behind Rancher with her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. The journey passed in tense silence, both of them listening for any sound that might indicate pursuit or discovery. The Hartwell Ranch appeared before them like a monument to tragedy. The main house stood dark and empty, its windows staring blindly across the prairie like dead eyes. Yellow tape fluttered from the front porch, the sheriff's attempt to preserve the crime scene, but Rancher could see that others had already been here. Footprints in the dried mud told the story of curiosity seekers and souvenir hunters who'd violated the family's final resting place. "Stay close," Rancher whispered as they approached the house. "If anything goes wrong, you run for the horses and don't look back." Emma nodded, but her grip on his hand suggested she had no intention of abandoning him. Together, they slipped through the back door into the house where her family had died. The smell hit them first, a lingering odor of violence and death that no amount of time could completely erase. Emma's breathing became rapid and shallow, and Rancher felt her trembling against his side. But she pressed forward, leading him through the darkened hallways with the sure knowledge of someone who'd grown up in these rooms. Marcus Hartwell's study was exactly as Emma had drawn it. Papers scattered everywhere, furniture overturned, books pulled from their shelves. But Webb's search had been hasty and desperate. If there was evidence to be found, it might still be hidden in places a panicked killer wouldn't think to look. Emma went straight to a large painting of a mountain landscape hanging behind her father's desk. She pressed something hidden in the frame, and the painting swung aside to reveal a small safe built into the wall. "Smart girl," Rancher murmured. "Your father taught you about his hiding places." Emma's small fingers worked the combination with practiced ease. Her birthday, Rancher guessed, or some other date meaningful to the family. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing a collection of documents that Webb had never found. By lamplight, Rancher examined the papers while Emma watched nervously from the doorway. What he found made his hands shake with rage. The documents detailed a massive land fraud scheme involving falsified deeds, bribed officials, and stolen property rights. At the center of it all was Marcus Webb, who'd been systematically cheating homesteaders and small ranchers out of their land for years. Marcus Hartwell had discovered the scheme and had been preparing to expose it. The evidence was damning: forged signatures, altered survey maps, records of payoffs to territorial officials. Webb would have lost everything and faced decades in prison if this information had become public. "Your father was a brave man," Rancher told Emma softly. "He was going to risk everything to stop Webb from stealing from innocent people." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Not the empty, traumatized stare she'd worn for weeks, but genuine grief for the father who'd died trying to do the right thing. They were so absorbed in the documents that neither of them heard the footsteps in the hallway until it was too late. The study door burst open, and Marcus Webb stepped inside with a gun in his hand and murder in his eyes. "I wondered when you'd show up here," Webb said, his cultured voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Took you longer than I expected." Rancher slowly straightened, positioning himself between Webb and Emma. "So you've been watching the place?" "Of course. I knew the little brat would eventually try to come back for whatever her father had hidden. Smart man, Marcus Hartwell. Too smart for his own good." Webb's eyes fixed on the papers in Rancher's hands. "I'll take those now." "These papers prove you're a murderer and a thief." Webb laughed coldly. "Those papers don't prove anything. Who's going to believe the word of a devil child and a crazy hermit against the most respected man in Millbrook? I've already told everyone that you kidnapped the girl, that you've been filling her head with lies to cover up your own crimes." "What crimes?" "The Hartwell murders, of course. Everyone knows you were bitter about being shut out of decent society. You finally snapped and killed that family, then took the girl to cover your tracks. When the truth comes out, when we find your bodies here at the scene, it'll all make perfect sense." Rancher felt Emma press closer to his back, her small body trembling with terror. Webb had thought of everything, had crafted a story that would not only eliminate the witnesses to his crimes, but also make him look like a hero for tracking down the real killers. "You won't get away with this," Rancher said, his hand moving slowly toward his gun. "I already have," Webb replied. "The whole town thinks that girl is cursed. When she turns up dead, they'll say it was God's judgment. And you, well, You're just a crazy old man who finally got what was coming to him." The standoff stretched taut between them, two men facing each other across a room that had already seen too much violence. But Webb had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the little girl he'd dismissed as a helpless victim. Emma had been slowly reaching into her pocket while the men talked, her movements hidden by Rancher's body. Now she pulled out something that made Webb's eyes widen in shock and fear. A small derringer that had belonged to her mother, a lady's gun that Sarah Hartwell had carried for protection. "You," Emma whispered, her voice rusty from disuse but clear enough to carry across the room. "You killed my family." Webb's gun swung toward her, but Rancher was already moving. The two shots came almost simultaneously. Webb's wild shot that splintered the wall where Emma had been standing, and Rancher's careful aim that sent the killer spinning to the floor. As Webb lay dying, his blood mixing with the stains left by his previous victims, he looked up at Emma with eyes full of hatred and disbelief. "You should have stayed hidden," he gasped. "Should have kept your mouth shut. My father taught me to speak up for what's right," Emma replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He taught me that evil only wins when good people do nothing." Webb's laugh turned into a death rattle. And then Marcus Webb, pillar of the community, respected businessman and cold-blooded killer, was gone. Dawn was breaking over Millbrook as Rancher and Emma rode into town. The evidence of Webb's crimes tucked safely in Rancher's saddlebags, and Emma's voice finally restored by the cathartic act of confronting her family's killer. Word of their return spread quickly through the settlement, and by the time they reached the sheriff's office, a crowd had already begun to gather. Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged from his office with a mixture of relief and apprehension on his weathered face. Behind him came Dr. Hayes, Reverend Morrison, and several other prominent townspeople, including some who had been part of the mob that burned down Rancher's home just days before. "Rancher," Tom said carefully, his hand resting on his gun but not drawing it. "Emma, we need to talk." "Yes, we do," Rancher replied, dismounting and helping Emma down from the horse. "But first, this town owes this little girl an apology." A murmur ran through the growing crowd. Martha Henley pushed forward, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "That child is cursed. Look what's happened since she came here. Violence, death, destruction. The only curse on this town," Emma said clearly, her young voice carrying with surprising strength, "was Marcus Webb." The crowd fell silent, shocked not just by her words but by the fact that she was speaking at all. For weeks, they'd been told she was mute, traumatized beyond recovery. Now she stood before them with her chin raised and her eyes blazing with intelligence and determination. "That's right," Emma continued, stepping closer to the crowd. "I can talk. I could always talk. I just didn't feel safe enough to do it until now." Reverend Morrison stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Child, we know you've been through a terrible ordeal, but making accusations against a respected member of our community is exactly what my father would have wanted me to do," Emma interrupted. "Because Marcus Webb killed my family, and then he tried to kill me to cover up his crimes." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook, her father's personal journal that she'd retrieved from the safe along with the other documents. "My father wrote everything down. Every meeting with Webb, every threat, every piece of evidence he'd gathered about the land fraud scheme." Dr. Hayes moved closer, his medical training making him naturally protective of the child. "Emma, are you certain about what you're saying? This is a very serious accusation." "I'm certain because I saw it happen," Emma replied, her voice never wavering. I watched Marcus Webb shoot my father in cold blood. I heard him order his men to kill my mother and my little brother. And I listened while he searched through our house looking for the evidence that would have sent him to prison. She opened the journal and began to read in a clear, steady voice. March 15th. Met with Webb again today. He's getting desperate, making threats about what will happen to my family if I don't drop my investigation. I've hidden copies of all the evidence in the safe. If anything happens to me, the truth must come out. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even Martha Henley had stopped her protests, her face growing pale as the implications sank in. March 20th, Emma continued. Webb offered me a partnership in his scheme, said I could make more money in a year than I'd see in a lifetime of honest ranching. When I refused, he said I was making a mistake that my family would pay for. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his expression grim. Emma, where is Marcus Webb now? Dead, Rancher said simply. He came after us at the Hartwell Ranch last night. Tried to kill us both to cover up his crimes. He won't be hurting anyone else. The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. You killed him? In self-defense. He had a gun on the girl, Tom. What would you have done? Before Bradley could answer, Emma spoke up again. Mr. Webb wasn't alone that night. He had 8 other men with him when they killed my family. Some of them are probably in this crowd right now. A ripple of unease ran through the assembled townspeople. Neighbors began looking at each other with suspicion, wondering who among them might have participated in the massacre. Emma pulled out another document, a list in her father's handwriting. My father suspected some of Webb's partners in the land fraud. He wrote down their names. She began to read. Deputy Marshal Carson, Land Office Clerk Williams, Surveyor Mitchell. As each name was called, men in the crowd began to shift nervously. Some tried to slip away, but the crowd had grown too dense for easy escape. The web of corruption that Webb had built was beginning to unravel, and everyone could see it happening. There's more, Emma said, producing the survey maps and forged deeds that proved the extent of the fraud. Webb stole land from dozens of families. The Hendersons, the O'Briens, the Kowalskis, all of them were cheated out of their rightful property. Mrs. Henderson, a widow who'd lost her farm the previous year, pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. My husband died believing he'd failed as a provider. He never knew his land was stolen from him. Similar cries rose from other victims of Webb's scheme. Families who'd been forced to leave their homes. Men who'd died thinking they were failures. Children who'd grown up in poverty because their inheritance had been stolen. All of them finally understanding that they'd been victims of a criminal conspiracy. Dr. Hayes examined the documents with the careful attention of an educated man. These appear to be genuine, he announced. The handwriting matches samples of Marcus Hartwell's writing that I've seen, and the details are too specific to be fabricated. But why didn't she speak before? Demanded Martha Henley, still clinging to her suspicions. Why let us think she was cursed? Emma's composure finally cracked slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the pain of a child who'd endured weeks of persecution. Because I was scared. Because I watched my family die, and I knew the killers were still out there. Because when I tried to trust people, they called me a devil child and tried to hurt the only person who'd been kind to me. She looked directly at Martha Henley, her young eyes blazing with righteous anger. You wanted to burn me like a witch. You said I was evil because I survived when my family didn't. How was I supposed to trust any of you with the truth? The shame on the faces around her was palpable. These people had let their fear and superstition turned them into a mob, had persecuted an innocent child while the real monsters walked among them. Reverend Morrison stepped forward, his face etched with remorse. Emma, there are no words for how sorry I am. We failed you when you needed us most. We let fear blind us to our Christian duty. You let fear make you cruel, Emma replied, but her voice held more sadness than anger. My parents taught me that good people sometimes make bad choices when they're scared. But they also taught me that good people try to make things right when they realize their mistakes. Sheriff Bradley had been quietly examining the evidence while Emma spoke. Now he looked up with a grim expression. This is enough to hang a dozen men and send a dozen more to prison for life. Emma, I need you to identify everyone you saw that night. Emma nodded and began pointing to faces in the crowd. Him, she said, indicating Deputy Marshal Carson. And him. Land Office Clerk Williams tried to run, but was quickly tackled by other townspeople. One by one, she identified the men who'd participated in her family's murder, watching as they were arrested or fled in panic. But it was her final identification that shocked the crowd most. And him, she said, pointing to a man who'd been standing near the back, trying to remain inconspicuous. It was Jake Morrison, the Reverend's own son, a young man who'd always been considered one of the town's most promising citizens. No, Reverend Morrison whispered, his face going white. Not Jake. He wouldn't. He held the horses while the others went inside, Emma said quietly. He was the youngest one there. I remember thinking he looked scared, like maybe he didn't really want to be part of it. Jake Morrison's face crumpled, and he fell to his knees in the middle of the street. I didn't know they were going to kill anyone, he sobbed. Webb said we were just going to scare Mr. Hartwell, make him back down from his investigation. When I heard the shooting start, I wanted to run, but Webb said I was already in too deep. His father knelt beside him, tears streaming down his weathered face. Why, son? Why did you get involved with those men? Money, Jake whispered. Webb promised me enough money to leave this place, to go east and make something of myself. I was tired of being poor, tired of watching other people get ahead while we struggled. I thought it would be easy money. The Reverend's anguish was painful to watch, but Emma approached the broken young man with surprising compassion. You were there, she said softly. You could have stopped them. I know, Jake replied, unable to meet her eyes. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. Good, Emma said simply. Maybe it'll help you make better choices from now on. As the arrests continued and the full scope of Webb's criminal enterprise became clear, the town began to grapple with the magnitude of their collective failure. They'd been so eager to find a scapegoat for their fears that they'd nearly allowed the real criminals to escape justice. Dr. Hayes approached Emma with a mixture of professional interest and personal remorse. Your recovery is remarkable, he said. To go from traumatic mutism to speaking so clearly and confidently, it suggests incredible inner strength. I had help, Emma replied, looking at Rancher with obvious affection. Someone believed in me when no one else would. Someone protected me when the whole world seemed against me. Rancher felt his throat tighten with emotion. For weeks, he'd been driven by guilt over his failure to save his own family, seeing Emma as a chance for redemption. But somewhere along the way, she'd become much more than that. She'd become the daughter he'd thought he'd lost forever. What happens now? Asked Sheriff Bradley. Emma, you have no family left, no legal guardian. She has me, Rancher said firmly. If she'll have me. Emma's response was to throw her arms around his waist, holding him tight. You saved me, she whispered. In every way a person can be saved. The legal formalities would take time, but the emotional bonds had already been forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual protection. Rancher had found his redemption not in saving Emma's life, but in giving her the love and security she needed to save herself. As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Emma and Rancher with shame-faced apologies and offers of help. The town that had branded her a devil child now saw her for what she truly was. A brave little girl who'd survived unimaginable trauma and found the courage to seek justice for her murdered family. Martha Henley was among the last to approach, her usual stern demeanor replaced by genuine remorse. I was wrong about you, child, she said quietly. Terribly, shamefully wrong. Is there anything I can do to make amends? Emma considered this for a moment, then smiled. The first genuine smile Rancher had seen from her since the night he'd found her in the storm. You could help us rebuild, she said. Mr. Rancher's house was burned down because of me. Maybe the town could help build him a new one. Us, Rancher corrected gently. Help us build a new home. The smile that spread across Emma's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Yes, she said. Help us build our home. 6 months later, the new house stood proudly on Rancher's rebuilt property, larger and more welcoming than the old one had ever been. Emma's laughter could be heard across the prairie as she played with the other children who now visited regularly, her trauma healing slowly but surely under the patient care of her adoptive father and the gradually rebuilt trust of her community. The land fraud victims had recovered their property, thanks to the evidence Emma and her father had preserved. Jake Morrison was serving 5 years in territorial prison, but had become a model prisoner, dedicating himself to helping other young men avoid the mistakes that had cost him so much. The other conspirators had received sentences ranging from death to decades in prison, ensuring that Marcus Webb's criminal empire would never rise again. But perhaps the most important change was in the town itself. The people of Millbrook had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of fear and prejudice, about how quickly good people could become a mob when they let terror override their compassion. They'd established new traditions, regular town meetings where grievances could be aired openly, a fund to help families in crisis, and most importantly, a commitment to listen before judging. Emma kept her mother's locket, but she no longer clutched it like a lifeline. Instead, she wore it as a reminder of the love that had shaped her and the courage that had saved her. She spoke often of her lost family, but without the crushing grief that had once threatened to destroy her. She'd learned that honoring the dead didn't require carrying their pain forever. And Rancher, who'd finally told Emma his real name was Samuel, though she still called him Papa Rancher with obvious affection, had discovered that redemption wasn't about erasing past failures. It was about choosing to do better when given a second chance. On quiet evenings, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Emma would sometimes ask him to tell her stories about his first daughter, Lucy. He'd learned that sharing those memories didn't diminish them. It honored them, just as Emma's stories about her parents honored their legacy. Do you think they would have liked each other? Emma asked one evening, referring to Lucy and her lost family. If they'd had the chance to meet, I think they would have been the best of friends, Rancher replied, pulling her closer as the evening air grew cool. Lucy always said she wanted a sister to share her adventures with. Maybe they're sharing adventures now, Emma said thoughtfully. In whatever place people go when they die. Maybe they are, Rancher agreed. And maybe they're watching over us, making sure we take care of each other. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened with the resilience that had carried her through her darkest hours. Tomorrow, can we ride out to the creek? I want to show you where I found those pretty stones. Of course, Rancher said. We'll make a whole day of it. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence, two souls who'd found healing in each other's love. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but its gift, the bond between a broken man seeking redemption and a traumatized child needing protection, would last for all the years to come. In the distance, the lights of Millbrook twinkled like earthbound stars, a community that had learned to choose compassion over fear, truth over prejudice. And in the house that love had built, a family born of tragedy but strengthened by hope looked forward to whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that together they could weather any storm. The silent child had found her voice. The lonely rancher had found his purpose, and a town had found its soul. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not just the triumph of justice over evil, but the triumph of love over fear, of hope over despair, of the unbreakable human spirit over all the forces that sought to destroy it. Emma's story would be told for generations in Millbrook, not as a tale of supernatural horror, but as a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the simple truth that sometimes the most broken people are exactly what each other needs to become whole again. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when the prairie wind whispered through the grass and the stars watched over the peaceful valley, Emma would touch her mother's locket and smile, knowing that love, in all its forms, was the only magic that truly mattered. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.